Hudson Valley Writer Center. It's nice to see new faces here. My name is Jennifer Franklin. I'm the program director. I'm really glad to see so many of you ventured out in this horrible weather to come to this meeting. We're glad to have you. Before we get started, I would just like to thank all of our sponsors. The programs, publications, and events at HVWC are made possible in part by public funds from NISCA and Arts Westchester, and by generous grants from the David G. Taft Foundation, the Bidell Foundation, the Fendara Foundation, St. Faith's House Foundation, and of course, by the generosity of the many individuals and donors and supporters who believe in the Writer Center and of the importance to society of literature and creative writing, especially during this time. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for buying tickets. As you know, the first 20 people who bought tickets for this event will get a copy of Chaya's book, so that's really wonderful. And since you don't have to buy it, those people, maybe you want to make a little donation in the bowl of the center. Okay, so I think what I'll do, because of the way they have formatted the reading, it's going to be a lot of questions of each other and then a Q&A for the audience. I'll read the bios of both of you now, so I don't come up and interrupt when you're having your reading and your talk. Okay, so Chaya Bhuvaneswar is a practicing physician, writer, and PEN American Award finalist whose work has appeared or is forthcoming in many national and international journals. Her work was recently selected for inclusion in Best Small Fictions. Her poetry and prose juxtapose Hindu epics, other myths and histories, and the survival of sexual harassment and radicalized sexual violence by diverse women of color. In 16 remarkable stories, she spotlights diverse women of color, cunning, bold, and resolute, facing sexual harassment and racial violence, and occasionally inflicting that violence on each other. White Dancing Elephants marks the emergence of a new and original voice in fiction, and explores feminist, queer, religious, and immigrant stories with precision, drama, and compassion. And in case you don't know, she's also a practicing physician. Jennifer Baker is the recipient of a 2017 NISCA-NYFA Artist Fellowship and a 2017 Queen's Council on the Arts New Work Grant, as well as the QCA Junior Ward Artistic Excellence Award in Nonfiction Literature for her WIP essay collection. Her essay, What We Aren't, was also listed as a notable essay in the Best American Essays in 2018. She works as a production editor, is a contributing editor to Electric Literature, and is the creator and host of the podcast Minorities in Publishing, a finalist for the 2018 Digital Book World Best Use of Podcasting in Book Marketing. She's the editor of Everyday People, The Color of Life, a short story anthology, an imprint of Simon & Schuster. Her short story, The Pursuit of Happiness, was nominated for a Pushcart Prize in 2017 by Newton Literary Journal. She was panel organizer and social media manager for We Need Diverse Books, a nonprofit organization that sprang to life from the hashtag We Need Diverse Books media campaign to increase minority representation in literature. We're really happy to welcome these two amazing writers here tonight. Is the microphone working, or does it need to be up? No. Okay. So thank you so much. Yes. So why don't you go up there? I'm gonna raise the volume of the mic right now. Hello. 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 Yep. Working. Okay.
Hello. Okay.
Perfect. Okay. Yay.
All right. Do y'all need to get wine first? I want to be considerate of the audience and the libation here. So thank you so much for having me. I am not Nicole Dennis-Benn, but I think I'm a suitable replacement for the time. I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. So a lot of my work tends to kind of look at New York City, New York regions, various aspects of family, culture, and relationships and stuff like that. So Everyday People, The Color of Life, which I edited, is an all BIPOC anthology. So that's Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And so it was such a joy to edit that anthology because everyone brings something so specific and different. And it was funny because that's around the time Chaya's book was coming out, so we were both like in that 2018 publishing haze of like, this is awesome, and anxiety inducing. And I'm a people person, but I've not gotten any sleep. So, we made it. And so I'm really honored to be reading alongside her because her collection is just phenomenal, utterly phenomenal. So you'll be reading it soon, so make sure to rate it on Goodreads.
So it's working, but you have to speak right into it, I think.
Like get really close? That's so weird. Yeah, I don't think it's working.
Say it again.
I don't think it's working because I'm getting pretty close.
Is it not synced?
At one time it was.
It was in the beginning.
Yeah, it was. Let's see. Okay. So Emma, will you press, or maybe I can bring it over here and say.
Oh, is that like Bluetooth? That's so cool. It's very interesting.
Okay. It's saying it's synced.
Does it?
Hello?
Does it really seem? Is
it live? Bill.
It is because of the brain.
I don't know, it's one of those things where sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
I can be naturally loud, so does this work?
I think it's working now.
Okay, so let's see if that works, and if not, I'll amplify.
Yeah, it's working for sure.
I'll do
Thanks,
my-
guys.
My outside voice. All right. Thank you. Watch it kick out like halfway through. So this is about a third or so into a short story in progress, which is actually on the longer side. All you need to know is it's about two people who meet in medical school in the mid-70s. So there's Michaela and Joel is a white medical student and Michaela is a black medical student, and they met in medical school in Nassau County, Long Island, about Hempstead, where I was born and raised. And this is sometime after they've met, and a kind of moment of, I don't know if I call it clarity for Joel, but it's a moment, so, and it's pretty short. They struggled, a man to a limb. It started when Joel was welcomed, beckoned really, hearing his name, and said in a frantic way as if needing help in battle. He was beckoned into Raymond's room by grunting and cursing that was par for the course for some patients. A portion of Raymond was wrapped up, bandaged, and cinched, the other parts of him restless and in full swing. Joel liked to think of himself as a man of action at work, but seeing thrusting and jerking, along with a person keeping another down, he was unsure if a seizure was happening or something else was at play. There was no rolling back of the eyes, no film spurting from Raymond's mouth, no convulsions, simply man against man. Get his other arm, was shouted at Joel, not by a doctor, but by an orderly hired for his mass. The orderlies looked alike to Joel, same shape, similar bulges in the neck, arms, torso, and thighs piercing through the scrubs they were assigned, less vibrant than that of a surgeon, ratty in places as if served for added destruction. Wharton, the same man yelled. Joel and his friend Dick, Wharton, didn't hesitate to follow orders. Dick took the full leg, whereas Joel positioned himself adjacent to the orderly on Raymond's left side. Joel urged down Raymond's arm and chest, encouraging a grumble from Raymond, who wasn't at full capacity, yet had vigor. Dick was the one to say, "Now what?" "Hold him," the orderly said, as though neither of them had been doing exactly that. Joel attempted to ease his restriction of Raymond's side. Raymond was bucking Bronco, and three men, white ones at that, attempted to settle him for an amount of time that shrunk, the more they added their weight to a man years older, yet more accustomed to fighting. Raymond was hot or heated. This seeped through his robe as well as the fabric of Joel's dress shirt and jacket. And Joel had his own tug of war. What were they waiting for? The answer arrived in the form of a female nurse who tossed top straps with Velcro at the trio. Now the evidence was there, and Joel awaited confirmation. You need an invitation? String them up. Joel went cold. An actual few degrees at the order. Michaela came to mind instantly. He could have refused or asked for the orderly to reward it at the very least, repeating, string him up. In his mind, Joel winced. It'd be this brief slip on his part that gave Raymond some leeway to elbow him in the side. Stung, gasping, Joel wanted to, he really did, suggest, beg Raymond to calm down. The man's teeth were bared, going for the big man on his right, whose bicep was exposed, while attempting to strap Raymond and tighten his reins under the bed spring. Joel had to act in the interest of a doctor. He straightened Raymond's arm and yanked it hard, rendering his left side unhelpful. The action incited a goddamn from Raymond, along with a gag. Joel pulled some more, ignored the howls coming out of Raymond. Joel took this moment of weakness to wrap the strap around and around, securing it with a triple knot onto the frame. Joel urged Raymond over on the bed so he looked like an imitation of Jesus on the cross. Dick stood back, arms folded, stared at Raymond with approval. Took you long enough, the orderly heaved. The man peered at his skin for scratches, and Joel was unsure if he was speaking to him or the nurse. Straps aren't exactly as available as gauze and covers, you gotta search for them. He said, leave him be until the next shift. He'll settle down once Chow arrives. Is he on medication? Joel asked. Something to settle his panic or his pain? The orderly appeared to take notice of Joel then. Medication? He barely keeps in what he gets now. I gotta pinch his nose and hold his jaw. It's my backyard wrestling days with this guy. No doctor wants to touch him until he submits, so be it. I didn't go to school for the degree. You want to prescribe something else for him to try spitting out? Go on ahead. The orderly and nurse exited, leaving Joel to wonder the extent of Joel Raymond's treatment. He was unstable, but not a lot of men were tethered to a bed, not any that Joel had seen on rounds. As the orderly predicted, once the coast was clear, a supervisor arrived. Dick started in on how rowdy it'd been, how he helped pin Raymond down, how difficult the whole ordeal was. He was up to the challenge, though. Dick was the star of his retelling. Joel was there too, Dick added as an afterthought. The supervisor du jour didn't appear to be listening. So when Joel inquired as to what the course of treatment was, he awaited to be educated on how to handle a case like this. He stays like this until he follows the rules. That's as far as it goes. His blood pressure won't stabilize if he doesn't calm down, that's for sure. Not good for the heart post-op, Joel recited. Exactly. Joe rubbed his stomach, the throb from impact of a member of Michaela's family, faint yet apparent. But is this normal? Dick gazed at Joel in wonderment. He couldn't have said anything. That's stupid. There's nothing normal about Raymond Jenkins. I meant the course of action, holding him down and tying him up. If you mean, is this how disturbed people are treated, then yes, Joel, yes, this is normal. Joel understood that there were times to be assured and times to be doubtful. However, in medicine, more often than not, only one was acceptable. So this had to end played on a loop in Michaela's mind. On Tuesdays and Fridays, Joel came home to find her in his apartment making dinner, where she had her news on the tongue, a conclusive thought pervading, thrumming, reminding her that in no way could their relationship last. She knew how it began, but how would it end? She'd been muttering words over a crock pot for a good 30 minutes before Joel's arrival, and the steam of the pot's contents, beef stew, curled the edges of her hair, creating its own halo effect. But this evening in particular, when Joel entered, instead of pouncing on him with her declarations, she noticed a change. The air shifted and bent with Joel's entrance. His whole aura said, "Don't ask," and because Michaela was the attentive type, she listened. As soon as he came in, he stared at her, not in a way that measured her up, more so absorbing every bit of her. If one wasn't as familiar with Joel as Michaela had been, though she'd hesitate to admit she was, they would have looked away or expected the piercer of eyes to. Contents were doused in the bowls, the two seated on the couch. Michaela allowed their meal to go in silence. She collected their bowls, washed them. Everything about the two of them was a silent movement. Michaela returned to the couch, uncertain if she should stay or if she should go. Joel answered this question with his head on her shoulder, a palm offered, which she took, and for another night she remained. Thank you.
Start with something upbeat.
I really enjoy asking writers. I admire questions. So Jen did me the honor of letting me ask a couple of questions, and then I'll read as well. Then I'll get put on the hot seat, and then we'll open it up to all of you. So, talk us through sort of how you got interested in this, and also how this this writing and this world that you're creating, these two really interesting students, people, kind of intersects with your project as an editor. And talk a little bit about that project too. I think there are like 4 questions in one.
Yeah, like I do on my podcast, I'll be like da 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 da. So yeah. So the first question first is about how the story came, like what elements brought me the story, and how writing and editing intersect. Got it. Cool. So when I was younger, I wanted to be a doctor. That was my goal. And then I don't know if you ever remember this show. It was on HBO with Joe Mantegna, and he played this doctor who accidentally operated on the wrong side of someone's head and got sued for messing up. And I was like, oh, that's really a high pressure situation. Okay, no. I am prone to mistakes. This isn't good. So I mean, I had always been writing, but I think that just kind of killed the medical dream. I was like, nope. But I've been fascinated with medicine. And so when I started this linked collection, so it's about the family. So Michaela and Joel are like the epicenter, and then it goes around with the family, sort of like Olive Kitteridge or something like that. And I really like the thought of 2 people meeting in medical school and how the body works. I remember I was saying I think about the body a lot. I think about psychology a lot. I overthink things. And I think that also keys into like my editor role, because I'm a production editor, so I'm the person who typesets the book, it's copy edited, proofread. Like if you see typos, that's usually my position, but those should be my books. And so like we have a very kind of critical, like over analytical perfectionist kind of mindset. Like how does this work? How do words work? How do sentences work? How do you balance page? How do things look on a page? So I think that kind of carries into like how I think about things as an editor. When I actually edit stuff, it's a conversation and I ask a lot of questions. It's, why is this the right word? Why is that feeling that the way that these lines sync up to make a paragraph, to make a page, is that the right kind of structure? Is that the right kind of flow to this kind of story? Is that realistic for that? So I think that's how it all comes into play. It's basically I'm an overthinker.
Can you talk, transitioning a little bit to your nonfiction as well, which has been recognized, and we've had conversations about a few. Can you talk a little bit about electric literature in general for people just maybe getting to know it as a venue to which people here might be interested in submitting and, hint, hint, and just talk about it and what kinds of things really grab your attention and sustain your attention and move you as an editor.
So Electric Literature celebrates its 10th year this year, and it's an online visual magazine. It started out in print and it's been online, so we publish new material Monday through Friday. Every Saturday, Sundays we have off, but we're constantly taking material from editors. So if you do have anything, it's electricliterature.com. It's free. You can read the fiction, the nonfiction. I do nonfiction specifically for them. I'm Jennifer at electricliterature.com. So you're more than welcome to submit to me, ask me questions. I'm not being facetious when I say that. I mean it. You can absolutely email me at any time. And so our stuff is related to literature, hence the name. So it's the intersections of arts and media. So essays about that. The fiction, the short fiction, kind of borders on the experimental or the weird. So it'd be a little less like Steinbeck and a little more like Carmen Maria Machado, or a little bit like just a little bit more experimental, a little just different. But it's not to say that the more realist stuff is not a fit. I think it's just kind of getting out of this, I think, quiet. You know what I mean? Like when someone says, it's quiet, it feels like nothing's happening, but everything's happening, and that's because it's not these kind of, it's more internal than external. Like the world isn't ending, but a person's world is ending. So that's kind of how you translate quiet. Quiet movies, quiet novels, things like that. And so, for that, if anyone was interested, you're more than welcome to submit. I think it's just anything that's different, and different doesn't necessarily mean it has to be written in a different way. I mean, I don't want to read another essay about someone's love for Harry Potter. I just don't. I don't. I think if I get a lot of essays on like writing after becoming a mother, which I think is important, but it usually is written the same way, kind of diary-like, and not too introspective, not too kind of like critical or craft-looking, or paying attention to craft. It's really like, I thought I would never write again after I had a kid, and I did. And you're like, awesome, so happy. That was very simplistic. So I think those kind of like, think about the execution, because I think in the digital age, it's always been that way. You could always publish something. It was just a matter of, it wasn't online. You just make pamphlets, you make zines. Zine culture was huge back in the day. But digital, there's such a proliferation of just like, my feelings. And that's great, but I think from like a standpoint of craft and structure and what am I taking out of it, I always ask submitters, what is the takeaway? It doesn't have to be a happy ending. It doesn't mean everything's been fixed, because that's not possible all the time, in nonfiction especially. But I think I should feel like maybe I feel closer to you as the narrator. Maybe I feel like you're going to be okay if at the beginning of the essay you weren't okay. Maybe I feel like, wow, I'm looking at something differently. I'm looking at immigration differently. I'm looking at, Hemingway differently. I'm looking at Octavia Butler differently. I want to come out with something. I don't want to come out angry that I clicked it and like, man, seriously, that sounded so good, and it was awful. Like Red Velvet Oreos, and it's like, that sounds amazing. And then you have it, and you're like, this is horrible. That was a bad life choice, but I did it, and so it's there. See, I'm bringing in my own stuff.
So I have one more question for you, and then now you're inspiring me. Electric Lit published an excerpt of my book, so
Yes.
I'll read a little bit from that. Let's see what happens. But
And we did an interview. We did an interview on Electric
yes,
Literature.
we did. I'm so grateful about that. But one of the other things that I think is really important is the concept of literary citizenship, and just like, what does that mean, kind of thing. And I remember I had this conversation with an agent once, Anjali Singh.
Yeah,
She's great. And she said, writers don't realize how much being a literary citizen actually helps you develop as a writer, but also actually helps you get published, And I was intrigued, and I thought about that and tried to act on it, but I'd love to hear your take on literary citizenship, and just kind of maybe words of reflection about that for writers sitting here with us.
That's a good question.
Yeah, right? I will try to answer that question.
Well, I should say being an exemplary literary citizen.
Oh, that's very kind of you. That's very kind of you. I think my main thing for me, myself, and I is that the world will be better if we know more, right? So if I can give you information, I will give you information. I'm not going to give you my pen, you know what I mean? But I will totally give you whatever context I can give you, having worked in publishing for 16 years. And that's why, even for electric literature, when people submit to me, I give a personalized, I give feedback to everybody, whether I reject your stuff, whether I accept it, whether I never hear from you again. I will tell you exactly my thoughts on it. I'll tell you exactly why it may or may not be a fit. I might even go in and line edit your stuff for you. I might do that. But I would definitely give you specific feedback. I won't just say, this isn't for us, unless it literally doesn't make sense. Like, I literally get stuff on brief and has nothing to do with arts and media, so I'm just like, this isn't a fit for us because it has nothing to do with what we're doing. But if it is, and it's just like, okay, it's, like the diary situation, it's 1,000 words where it should be 2,000 words. It's, it's something you're not ready to write about. It's something you start off really well with in the beginning and then falter at the end. I will absolutely tell you that specifically because I want people to take something away from the experience. Because if you just get a form letter, what do you think? If I just said to you, if you worked 2 years on this essay, and I just said, yeah, great, not for us. What is your takeaway? Your takeaway is nothing. Your takeaway might be very, negative. It might be negative about you, right? It might be, I suck. It might be, I just did. But if I tell you, hey, you like your writing, this isn't working because you rushed this, and put 17 things in one essay. So if you work on that, I think you'll make a better essay. You can work from that, right? You can actually utilize that to do something. That's what I think citizenship is. I think citizenship is the sharing of information. Because me withholding information, I guess it benefits me. I guess, at the end of the day, but it doesn't, but then it just pisses me off when I keep getting really bad submissions. It upsets me when I see people not being upset about how the industry or upset about rejection and not even being able to get criticism. It upsets me when people are trying to build community and don't know how to build community. There's a level of access that needs to happen. And if you don't have access, then you can't improve. And that's, so I improve because I had access. I have privilege. I have cisgender privilege. I have heterosexual privilege. I have being in New York City is a privilege, right? Working in publishing is a privilege. My aunt introduced me to writing and Writer's Digest and stuff. All these things that I take are privileges as a marginalized person. I want to also extend that to other people. So I think that's part of it. It's not just me, or, I just get signed a book deal, me, who can I make friends with, who can I be? And I've seen that in the industry. And I know you've seen it too. You've seen it too, where it's, now that I need something, who do I connect with? How do I connect with people? And I think that I admire that about Chaya too. Like when Chaya's book came out, she was really promoting a lot of other people. She wasn't just promoting herself, she was promoting others, especially women of color. So Chaya looked out a lot for other people and tried to connect with those people who had similar values. And I think that's something that's very specific rather than who can I just connect with who's like 1, 2 Pulitzers, and people do that. But I just think it's more about connecting and helping people. So even if I never ever see you again and you help, and that essay is now like a push cart winner and you won 10,000, great, then that's amazing. I don't have to get credit for that. I just want people to be better people, and I think it makes me a better person. Theoretically, I don't know. This may all be a dream, like saying elsewhere, I don't know.
No, we can confirm that. So
I'm eager to hear your
I'm
work.
going to read a little bit, and then we'll come back and conversate a little bit, and then we'll, and I hear that there's a specific train that many people need to be on, and I need to be on, so that will be quick.
I'm going to ask you about your childhood.
Oh no. So I'm really grateful to have not only published this book, but sort of gotten welcomed in a lot of places we didn't expect, like Entertainment Weekly and Elle and places like that, right at the time when some of the most hateful rhetoric that any one of us could have possibly imagined was kind of normalized. Like just to think, oh, Entertainment Weekly thinks brown people are worth reading about. Okay, that's something, I'll take it, So there's obviously a lot of hard work that we all have to do. But for me, looking with freedom at our own intimate relationships, and I very much include friendships in that, like really close friendships, it's a form of empowerment in the sense that nobody's dictating what we have to think about, what we have to write about, what we feel is important, like it's the deeply personal becomes a space of liberation, if that makes sense. So I'm going to actually read from a story that did appear online in Narrative magazine, and just thinking more about the literary citizenship and friendship theme got me started on it. It's a story about women's friendship. It's called To Linda. So here I am, sitting in the doctor's waiting room, hoping no one talks to me or intuits why I'm fat, when the door that says on the outside, "Do not enter," swings open, and To Linda storms out, not long for this world. The young blonde nurse stands there, bracing the open door with one hand, holding a clipboard with the other. "We should have the results back any day," she calls, though it's obvious my best friend isn't listening. "Later this week, do check," her voice wafts out. She's a woman working in a shop, not an announcer of life versus death. "Not long for this world. Don't say things like that," I would have pleaded with To Linda if she had said the words out loud, one of her usual angry and dapper turns of phrase. "Oh, you'll fight this thing," I said, when she first told me she had stomach cancer. And for once she nodded, not ridiculing the cliché. That was a year ago, before I became this wretched person, a woman sleeping with her best friend's husband, a woman waiting to take over a life. "Aren't you full of surprises, Miss Narika Kandalwala?" To Linda would have said to me. "You're not as boring as I thought," if she had known. But To Linda doesn't know what her husband and I are capable of. Cancer is what she's come to know. How its cells lived as shameless parasites of the body, the dark and mocking children who'd never leave home. To Linda could caution you about genes that whisper false instructions, genes speaking louder and louder over rivers of gushing new blood vessels, these rivers mindless and cruel as they crossed in confusing directions of their own, greedily serving the cells of destruction. This is To Linda Kim and what she's been given, age 37, Korean American, born to a waitress in Flushing, board-certified internist and geriatrician, married, no children, sigmoid cell gastric carcinoma, stage 4, prognosis, 6 months. 6 months. If I weren't betraying To Linda, I'd use what I know for her benefit. My arm around her shoulder, I describe Audre Lorde's cancer journals, her dignity, her hope, and then To Linda would be forced, as usual, to turn on me with her mix of affection and contempt, the potent and honest combination that I've always counted on. She might say, "Narika, you don't win any points for reading some poor woman's private diary, whose problems you can't even understand to begin with. It's amazing how you're trying to read books for a living. At some point you have to stop going to school and get a job. At some point you have to accept it. The real world isn't made of poetry." I'd urge her on in making fun of me. I'd do anything to distract her. Talk about Dadaist art or North Korean politics or Betty Davis movies, her favorites. Now, Voyager, with a childless Betty Davis, trying to make do by being a cool aunt. Of human bondage, Betty as the pregnant, vulgar, coercive, determined Mildred, all about Eve. What it is like to have your life, bit by bit, stolen by a woman you trusted. But all I do instead is slink down in the passenger seat of Talinda's black Benz, hoping she doesn't really notice me. A real friend would take Talinda out to a movie after her day at the oncology clinic, some Betty Davis old romance. But who was that actress after all? Some skinny, overbearing, self-important white woman who bears more than a passing resemblance, I realized suddenly, to Talinda's husband, George's mother. She'd never remarried after George's father left her for one of his students, a beautiful Asian woman, the two of them traveling to go teach at a university in Singapore. All Talinda has is a mother-in-law who, like Talinda's own mother, hasn't even been told anything about the cancer. A mother-in-law who's expressed the wish loudly at times that George had never married Talinda, who wished Talinda had never existed. If I loved Talinda, really loved her, I'd tell her that her husband seduced me, and vice versa. That the three of us should get far away from each other, that she deserves a better life, friend, and lover. If I were good, I'd exit, pursued by a bear. And I'm going to skip around a little bit because I'm watching the time and I really want you guys to have a chance to talk. So, of course you can either buy the book or get the free book, but you can also read it for free online. So. I didn't say that. So, let's see. Okay. For once, I'd be the one with adult knowledge Talinda didn't have, and I could tell her what was what. I gave in after George called me in the middle of the night, crying for me to come help cook something she could eat. After George and I started meeting in grocery stores, hospital cafeterias, places where we could help Talinda together while she was going through surgery and modified chemo. Tired by marriage, or maybe by his marriage to Talinda specifically, with its burdens, the heaviest of which was extreme privacy, George pulled me in. The lingering touch on my arm, my back, my hand, the grateful smiles that just never felt straightforward, and then his expression when I told him how I tried and failed a few times to have a child with donor sperm. I know what it's like to hope and be disappointed, he'd said, to wait and want and not have children, to be the only people waiting in the world. Believe me, I know what it's like. George and Talinda tried a lot too. It wasn't clear now if her in vitro might have speeded the cancer. She would have kept trying. George was the one who couldn't try again, unable to bear how relentless she was. They'd just gotten to the point of discussing adoption when her new symptoms started. Then Talinda had to tell George that she'd never make him a father. Years ago, the only time that George ever came close to leaving Talinda, early on when they were living together but not yet engaged, during the harshest days of Talinda's medical residency, when she would stay at the hospital for 4 days at a time without calling once, she'd finally bucked the routine and come home before the end of her shift, trading with someone, running all the way. It was unthinkable to her to not work the hardest, to not dominate, to not be the best. Unthinkable to take the time to answer George's calls, even though George had said that if she didn't cut down her hours, they'd break up. The night they did almost break up, when she got home, she cried when she didn't find George, calling me to come over so she wouldn't act like a dimwit, quote unquote, when he did show up. Disheveled, she sat at my feet waiting for him, saying that if I breathed a word about how desperate she'd become, she'd murder me. When he let himself in later that night, I saw how Talinda pretended not to care, but how she then came up behind him as he sat eating alone, how she touched him so gently without asking anything. Today, waiting for Talinda to be done at the clinic, by avoiding certain patterns of thought, by walking fast whenever I pass by mirrors, by keeping in my mind an image of Talinda not loving George, never really loving him, I made it all right that I would be the one having George's baby. Just for a few seconds, I told myself that once I started really showing, I would tell her that this was a baby conceived from donor sperm. I'd accept it when she teased me about using the sperm of a white man. But it's possible Tolinda will be gone before the birth and never even know my baby is half white. We'd have our joy once she was gone, once our goddess Tolinda had risen fully out of reach, high in a white palace, the king's daughter, the golden girl. That image from a book the two of us read in high school, from an old story of infidelity and careless, childless adults. By thinking of Tolinda as always being high above me, I could sometimes think of her as being untouched by what I had been doing with George. Like she had too much pride to be hurt by it, like she had better things to do. But here I was, a little more than 4 months pregnant with a boy, with George's son. I'm gonna skip ahead a bit. It's very cruel, isn't it, to skip ahead at this point? So that's in the present, and then we kind of see stuff that happens a year before. So I'll just read that section. That's kind of self-contained. 1 year ago, "You're late," Tolinda said. Norika slid into a fake leather booth. It's where Tolinda's parents first met. Neither had lived in America more than a few years. The laughing acupuncturist insisted that the too serious pretty girl who brought his food sit down with him. That was when the very idea of Tolinda first began, frivolous as that was, serious as Tolinda Kim is today. Hard to imagine Tolinda's sensible mother ever being pliant, giggly, tractable, but Tolinda's doctor father, telling strangers the story, always insisted the woman was. In a booth like the one where Tolinda and Narika sat, the confident man, years before he would leave Tolinda and her mother forever, must have pulled Tolinda's mother by the hand, maybe even caressed her roughened fingers, charmed her enough to make her stay. Often, Narika thinks that the facts of her parents' divorce have defined Tolinda: abruptness, condescension, pride, even barefaced lying, a cynical indifference, and yet a kind of quiet and unshakable loyalty, the same kind that made Tolinda's mother send money to her in-laws in Korea for years after the father absconded. Before leaving, he'd taken money from his own parents as well. Tolinda's mother, eventually Tolinda herself, sent them thousands. Tolinda is much easier to love than to like, but then again, Narika thought, she herself is not that easy to even tolerate. "You've lost weight," Narika said when minutes passed and Tolinda did not speak or even make eye contact. The woman knows how to give a cold shoulder, actually an icy one, as punishment for Narika's being nearly half an hour late to their dinner. Tolinda looked up from her menu. "No, I mean it," Narika said, "a lot of weight. Like what, at least 30 pounds? Don't tell me you did this on purpose. It's not chic. You look skeletal." Narika aspired to be mean, as she often did when in Tolinda's company. She's always told herself that this is only in anticipation of Tolinda's bona fide meanness, which she has been so interested in and enraptured by since the 4th grade. It is bracing, watching Tolinda eviscerate some stranger with verve. The last time they'd come to this cheap Korean restaurant, just a few months before, Tolinda sported a new, thin, but unmistakable magenta streak in her hair, like some Japanese teenager rebelling against the high school principal. Despite Tolinda's Chanel suit and pearls, Narika always half expected to see her slinging a Hello Kitty knapsack across her chair. That time, Tolinda had picked up a brochure in Korean with one phrase in English only: water bar. "Miso shopai is a Japanese name for it," Tolinda said. Narika remembered the contemptuous curl of her lovely lips. "It's from an expression about good luck, bad, a matter of chance, as shifting as water. So might as well live it up now with baths, massages, and lots of you-know-what."
eyebrows, Narika asked. Don't ask boring questions. Do I look like a cultural tour guide? Talinda snapped, just as a waiter came over to replenish their water glasses. He was the owner of the restaurant. Narika recognized him from the large photo near the front entrance. He also had the appearance of being some daughter's father. This is how Narika's own father could have been: serene, present, working, instead of disappearing, unemployed, and indifferent. It had been Narika's mother, and not Narika herself, who waited anxiously for his letters and cards, not even insisting on a check. Narika's mother, who spent her modest salary on beauty treatments, facial creams, hair oils, expensive clothes, so that the house had to be sold to pay all the debts once Narika's mother was dead. Narika's mother, who, upon hearing that Talinda had lost her father too, wondered aloud why Talinda's mother hadn't tried harder to persuade the man to stay. What are you nice girls doing talking about water bars? The genial man said now, pausing with a half-full pitcher of water on his tray. Those are not innocent places. For his intrusion, Talinda rewarded the man with a cold smile. I'll have the dinner plate, she said, giving him her menu while looking straight at Narika. But instead of taking the hint, the good-looking Korean older man caught Narika's eye, leaned closer than he had to, and said, you know the secret of the water bars? They're favorite places of the water demons, the kappas. That's why you should never go to a host club, or God forbid, work in a hostess club that's near any body of water. The kappas will wait for you under the water. Then they'll ravish you, seduce you to giving them pleasure, maybe even give you a baby. You know the only way to avoid the kappa? The man had asked Narika, bedroom-eyed. Narika shook her head, ever the wide-eyed ingenue. Talinda, weary, answered him like she was sick of his type. Yes, you have to be polite. Bow to the kappa as deeply as you can. Talinda bowed her head to illustrate her meaning. The man smiled, but Talinda was determined that not to be complacent, not to be charmed. The goal is to kill the bugger with your politeness. You bow to him only to make him bow to you. And as soon as the water falls out of the cup on top of his head, he cannot move. He's stuck there, and you move on, and then you're free of him. I mean, totally free of that demon. Like, you don't ever have to talk to him again. Like, he'll know enough not to come near you, ever. Raising her eyebrows slightly, she glanced at the man as he stood there, transfixed with his tray of water. He never approached their table again, not that night or any other night. Thank you.
That's actually one of my favorite stories from the collection.
Oh, thank you.
Because there's not a lot of simplicity to it, right? You have two best friends, and it can be easy to kind of have a villain, right? There's a good guy and a villain, right? But Talinda is not totally lovable.
No.
And Narika is not totally innocent. So when you're writing a story like frenemies,
Well, they're really best friends.
they are. I
And
got that in the
shadings
story
of
too,
that.
so y'all should read it.
She is, I mean, I didn't have an affair with anybody's husband, thank God, but just for my own safety, you know. But she is based on a really good friend of mine, and so
Which you.
Talinda. Talinda's based on someone. So I tell people that, and hopefully it makes it, well, I don't know if it makes it more believable, but it makes it maybe easier to imagine that there are all these complex configurations of friendships, including between women of color who have a pro forma a priori solidarity defined for them, but really they're just as human, right, as everyone else, and just as competitive and envious, and as you know from recent stuff on Twitter, which happened to me.
I'll have to go back and roll the decks, but cool.
Yeah.
We'll talk offline. But I definitely got that about about, I mean, you and I talked a little bit about this for electric literature too, was the appreciation for kind of these layered stories that weren't always so mired in trauma. You know, it wasn't like as though something negative couldn't happen, but there was just so much more to the story that you wanted to explore throughout the collection. And that's part of why that was one of my favorite stories, because that it's not the idea of friendship, the complexity of friendship, and the complexity of relationships. So when you're writing a collection of stories, and maybe, okay, this is two-pronged. One, did you aim to write a collection of stories? And two, as these stories were coming together, did you kind of notice this theme of the complexity of relationships, that it couldn't necessarily be black and white, because life isn't black and white?
I think if there was a theme in my mind of like what I read about again and again, it's closeness and the dynamics of closeness and distance kind of mediated through what's at stake in claiming a space to be really brutally honest in any kind of interaction. Like, you're really honest, and then what? Then what happens? You know, what cost might you pay? I don't know, because I think that moment of like some form of confrontation or honesty or really right there in your face communication was so much a part of how the women in the stories resist being victimized by different kinds of violence. You know, that even if they're in a situation, they think, they speak, you know, they challenge. And so I think, thinking about, I think it started to come together as a collection kind of linked by these women, you know, these different characters of women, in one case a non-binary character of male to female, non-binary, that they published in Electric Lit, the excerpt of. But I think it's that sense of like a questing, challenging way of being in the world. But you know, I think it's really mysterious how a collection comes together, and I guess that's one thing I'm really, like, in terms of sharing information and trying to be a good literary citizen, I really encourage people to trust to that mystery. You know, I feel like there's too much explanation a lot of times, or demand for explanation of how are you going to write this, or that's an interesting idea, what are you going to do with it, and then someone kind of forcing you to answer, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this, but you might as well say, oh, I don't know, whatever, you know, be as vague as possible and trust to that mystery, because ultimately it's not an explainable thing, it's just you on the page.
The editor in me agrees and disagrees with that.
At least to create and not to edit.
I totally agree with that. You can't explain writing as it's happening, because sometimes you don't know. Are we all pretty much on the same board with that? Like, we can't always, yeah. Okay. Universally agree. Cool.
And you'll need a great editor later, whoever that is, whether that's a different part of your brain at first or a wonderful editor out in the world. But I think just to give yourself freedom to write it in the first place, so that there is something to edit, I think that mystery is really important and valuable. And we take it for granted, but it's actually what's special about us as writers, because we're like always kind of blissed out when you get into that place, you know?
I'm an emotional eater, I don't know about you. So you didn't necessarily set out to do a collection?
No, it kind of just came together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So my next question is also in regards to the process. So do you mind talking a little bit about how White Dancing Elephants came to be, like, for people to get like an intimate sense? Because you've been also very open online as well about, and I think we both share that, like, this is what we've experienced in publication years leading up to it. And yours is with an indie press.
Yeah.
And you won a prize. You won the Zinc Book Story Prize. And so can you go a little bit from there, like how that experience was?
I think it's really good to enter contests, and I really encourage people to read Vanessa Hua's writings about her similar experience. So she has a collection, Deceit and Other Possibilities, and first it was published by a really pretty small indie press, but was welcomed into different spaces and included and mentioned and supported, and it's actually now going to be reissued 3 or 4 years later by Counterpoint, which is really exciting. So I just think I reached the point where I was getting really brave about submissions and doing that thing of submit, and Zank really took me by surprise when they called me up on a day off when I was completely thinking about something else and said, well, guess what? So I think it's really, it illustrates to me, enter stuff, submit, get the numbers out there versus overthinking each individual submission or having any relationship to anyone writing either personalized or form letters back to you. Just submit, because ultimately it is a numbers game, it seems like.
Mm-hmm. So when White Dancing Elephants came out, how were you feeling? Because it goes from, I guess,
there's a lot.
The joy or however you feel about writing, but then you're a marketing person. You were a machine. You were a machine about it. So did you still kind of retain that joy or excitement or any exuberance of, I get to talk about my book, or I'm so
I think
I'm not getting sleep, I'm so stressed. How many books have you sold?
I wasn't stressed. I love the subversion of not having a publicist and getting as much book publicity as I did. It was a big FU, to anyone who was oh, you only publish with Zank and not RH, or whatever, So I really enjoyed the subversive thrill of having these editors and publicists ask me something inside the lab. So how'd you do that? How'd you get coverage in Harper's Bazaar? The truth is, you can't get it. You can't. It's like Jen was saying, you can't ooh, I need to network, or I need friends, and you're hey, be my friend. You're a Pulitzer winner. That. But I think again, it's a numbers game, and I as rudimentary as it was, I sort of made a very homemade email press kit. I called it a press kit. I like using these names for things that are probably what is this? I sent it to Jen. I actually sent it to Jennifer, right? I'm hey, I'll go. So I think.
And you sent a very convincing pitch, because we book so many people, and we have to say no to, we solicit so many people, we have to say no to most people who come to us. But it was really a great letter, and your work is great.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think it's really important. There's so much shame that writers are taught through the process, one way or the other. And I don't know that anything but just persistence and getting a kind of exposure therapy, where if you're scared of spiders, but every day you wake up in a bed full of spiders, and eventually you will not be afraid of spiders. So it really is that, where you have to get yourself completely over the shame. And so some of what made it easier is really having a day job I'm committed to. I had a very nice conversation with my taxi driver about how to get health insurance and pay for his meds, and he was no, don't give up. So I mean, that feels very grounding and real, whatever your day job is, and hopefully that will make you feel empowered. I really think a lot of my friends who have day jobs and write, a wonderful Latino writer, Daniel Olivas, who's written beautiful essays for the LA Review of Books and op-eds for the New York Times and LA Times. He's a lawyer, he's a practicing lawyer, and we talk about this, that the day job, it's not your shackles, it's your FU to the man, it's your FU to people who want to dictate literary taste, or who say, I loved your novel, but it was too blah blah or blah blah. It's your way of saying, F you, I don't write to please you. I don't care that much what you think. I think it's healthy to care a little bit, oh, what did you, oh, you didn't get paragraph 7? Okay, I'll look at that paragraph again. That's healthy. Like that's, because writing is a form of communication. So if someone's saying, I feel like you were trying to communicate something that didn't quite get to me, I do want to know that. Obviously, you're always working on it, but that is so different than someone telling Nicole Chung, whose beautiful memoir, All You Can Ever Know, was submitted to multiple places before Catapult took it. Someone telling her, it's too angry, this memoir. It's just too angry, and there's never been memoirs about the adoptee's perspective. Who wants that? Or like someone telling me, it's not the time for Indian lit right now. What? So I think you have to seize your day job and use it as a shield against the BS that is thrown at you by people, who it's just trash bravado talk, because nobody knows what will sell.
Absolutely.
Nobody knows it. It's the most speculative, inefficient business one can possibly imagine, right? Terry McMillan, like, photocopying her book and selling it out of the back of her car, to community centers and barbershops and beauty parlors, and getting a buzz, and then, so like, it was good both ways. It was good when it was a mimeograph, and it was good when it was like a movie, a multi-million budget movie. So really nobody knows. So you have to, I really think, to survive as a writer, you really have to have in the back of your mind that colossal FU of just like, you just can't get in my way. Like, this matters too much to me. Get out of my way. If you really feel like someone is disputing your project, first of all, naming your project and then disputing it, neither of which they really have total authority over it to begin with. Does that make sense? I'm proselytizing. So we have to do questions. So
if you take nothing else, F you. F you, world! I'll write my books!
But the thing is, you can be on the down low about it, and you can be nice, but inside you're thinking it. That's the real. So who has questions for Jen, for me? I've talked a lot, so maybe preferentially for Jen.
Do you see a parallel? Because I know that you've talked a lot about tonight about the trials and tribulations of being a person of color and creating novels and nonfiction and essays. Do you see a parallel between that and the disabled and people with mental disabilities community in writing?
Okay. Well, I want to acknowledge that I'm able-bodied, so I want to acknowledge my privilege there, first and foremost. And I think that I can definitely say as an able-bodied person that disability is one of the least talked about marginalizations. It's totally. Like, when I share stuff about disability, it gets the least attention. When I share stuff about racism, it gets the most attention. So it's very interesting what happens. And that's also because of the communities. Like, our people who are following me aware of the disability community and stuff like that. Like, I need to educate myself. But I definitely would, I think marginalization, period, is definitely something that we have to deal with in terms of creation and actually who recognizes and understands the work, right? So, like, I have to process of, like, am I coming at this with an ableistic mindset if I'm editing it or reading it? Or am I contextualizing what I've learned as an able-bodied person and trying to push back and asking better questions than making assumptions? So that's my short answer from a privileged standpoint. Your thoughts?
I just echo. I really liked Sick by Porochista Kapoor, and a new one that's coming out, The Pretty One.
Oh yeah, Kia Brown's comes out Tuesday.
Because that talks about the intersection in an interesting way of race and so.
And Kia she doesn't have a mental disability, she has cerebral palsy. But Bassie Ipby's book, I'm telling the truth but I'm not lying, I always mix that up, and she told me that. And that talks about having bipolar disorder, Esme's, right? Esme, Wei Wong.
Yeah.
It talks about,
Schizophrenia.
and
Yeah.
Morgan Parker has a young adult novel coming out that's about a young
about
black girl,
depression,
and she's depressed in an all-white town during the Obama election, 2008. Like, that's an intense, it's not intense in the sense of like, oh my God, something horrible happens every page, but it's being black or being abled and reading that, like, makes depression, ableism, being the only black person in the town, it's just, oh, that's deep. And it's hilarious. It's a hilarious book. So, she got away with a lot of stuff. There are BJs in there. And I was like, how did you publish this? So, hey! She's like, oh, Morgan, what? This is great! There's like Black Panthers, and, you know, like, finish a court. I'm like, what is this? Any other questions?
I have a question. You said earlier, submit, and it's a numbers game.
I do think that.
I don't quite understand.
So, you know, I know earlier on when I wrote, it would be a big thing for me to submit a given story, let's say that I looked at and revised, whatever, not, you know, usually not like that afternoon, oh, I just wrote this 10 minutes ago. So like, a few weeks at least. It would be a big thing to submit to 3 or 4 places. Like I would be waiting and be like, oh, you know. And then I did start to approach it like a machine, you know, even before this. And a lot of it is because Submittable now has these programs built in where you can do searches for free places to submit, you know, so you don't, because submit also, you know, it's helpful to have as many free places as possible, right? And so, if you really do it, like if you submit one piece to like 50 to 100 places, it will get published. It will get published. I mean, if there's, you know, there's merit in it. I mean, it will, and you'll get even more than one. You'll get in trouble because more than one place will be like, hey, you know, you're like, uh-oh. But, you know, because officially some of them say no simultaneous submissions, but very few do. Very few. Some really get mad. Like I can tell you, December, they mean it. Don't do it. Don't do it. They got mad.
But how long does it take them to
A long time. That was terrible.
So that's the,
I cajoled them. They said, okay, you didn't know, but don't make that mistake again. So now I tell people, do it for others, but not December. But, no, I mean, I really, but again, it's like exposure therapy. Because think about it. One person reads what you've written and says all kinds of things, and it goes deep in your soul, and you're like, maybe I can't write dialogue, or whatever, you know, somebody says. 50 people say 50 different things. You know, a story that wins an award is also the story that somebody who's writing you don't even like writes to you about, because always Google the editor, no offense, cover your ears, always Google the editor rejecting you and find something they wrote that you hate. You know, Hannah Tinty
the editor in me is like, what?
She used to make voodoo dolls. I'm not kidding. She used to make voodoo dolls when she got rejections and like stick pins.
Oh my goodness.
Don't do that.
I don't think that's I don't want to know that there's a voodoo doll in there.
Whatever makes you feel that courage and confidence again. Because I think the trickiest thing about writing is that lack of confidence, you know, impairs the writing. I mean, you really have to grab onto that confidence and hold onto it as tightly as you can, because so much threatens to strip it away and take it away. But I really do think it is a really good feeling to submit broadly. You form a different relationship with any reply that you get. You really do. And you will get acceptances. It really is a numbers game. So, good luck. And I know we're trying really hard to stay till time.
We're at 8:15.
Yeah. So what do we sign now, or?
Yeah, unless anyone has a question.
Any more questions?
Other questions?
Yeah, we can definitely accommodate one.
Yeah.
And don't worry, you know how some people say they hate this is more of a comment than a question. We're not like that. We'll take anything.
Well, in this instance, yes. Totally.
Seize the day job. That's my takeaway.
Yeah, completely.
Right? And I like
That's
steady
interesting, wasn't
paychecks. That's
It's
really
such
fun.
a lot. It's such a that's what I like when you look through the layers, you know, and people who made a big deal about I chose writing. I could have gone to this grad school or that job. I chose my art. Okay, I'm like, well, that's great. You know, you do that. You know, I had reasons. I had debts to pay. I wanted to be able to send my kid to karate if he wants to go versus counting every dime. And then you have a real conversation with many of those people, and they can't do things, they can't afford things that they'd like to be able to afford at a given age because publishing does not pay them as well as it should. You know, and there aren't artist grants the way there are in Ireland, let's say, you know, like where you can have some subsistence income consistently. You know, we obviously should do that. I mean, so then you just learn to be grateful. I mean, although maybe you write less, but you can train yourself not to write less. If you really accept that there's not going to come some day when, like, whatever, you know, big Hollywood producer says, I'll give you $80 million for your book. It's not even going to happen to John Grisham. I don't even think he got $80 million. You know, like, it's just not coming. So you make do with what you have. But be grateful that you're not counting every dime the way you would if you were living advance to advance, because that's the way it would be.
And there are people who do live off writing. You know, I don't want to be like contrary because
No, it's good.
I like having.
But they live
I like
differently.
eating. Yeah, but I also like eating.
Right.
So you know, like, but there are people. There are people who are well off. There are people who make as much as I do a year. You know, and are doing that, subsisting from writing for magazines, from writing from workshops, so it's totally doable. I think we have that comfort level for that. So yeah.
I hope this is a comment. I hope I'm not making this up, but I think that I read that W.S. Merwin, who very famous poet who recently died, I think, but yes, very recently, but he wrote that when he was a young man, or maybe just met the woman that he would marry, that they decided they wouldn't have children because he wasn't going to take another job, which was an amazing statement.
Yeah. I respect that choice completely. You know, I wish it were easier for more women to make that choice without stigma. Like to say, I know I don't want to have kids. Completely respect that choice.
Yeah.
But I think it's always a good mental position to, instead of kind of bemoaning a day job as an albatross, you know, or a barrier, to really dig into it. If you're not gonna quit, and you're pretty committed, to dig into it and find the gratitude if you can. You know, I feel like it's been a major turning point for me because I went through that too. Oh, I wish, you know. Oh, it's so much work. Oh, it's, you know. You realize no one's gonna come and like make it all easy for you.
We're not gonna have what is it? The woman who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. Someone actually gave her. Was it her? Yeah, it was her. And someone gave her like money for a year to finish To Kill a Mockingbird, and she did it.
Apply for stuff.
Yeah. No, but I mean someone just coming in and giving it to me.
Like
I do that all the time. I mean, someone just saying, "Hey Jen, you want like me to pay a referee?" I'm like, "Yes, Santa." Yeah. I'm almost 40. That'd be great.
But then she never wrote another book.
Yeah. But she did publish another one. Remember that Clocksman or Watchman? The Watchman?
Goes to the watch.
Yeah. That she never wanted to see again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that did take a turn. Sorry.
Any other questions? Oh, there's.
Hi. So I'm a big fan of you both. I adore both your collections, and you paved the way for so many POC to open up doors for us that weren't necessarily open. I'm just curious about what is next for you both.
Get Chaya, what's next? What's on the menu tomorrow. What's happening?
I feel really grateful. I feel really grateful because I feel like we have an opportunity now to submit some manuscripts, but at the same time, I feel satisfied enough. Like I loved it that Ocean Vuong, whose book I really recommend, it's so beautiful. He was really good. See, he did the FU maneuver. The interviewer was like, "Oh, you know, are you worried about your sophomore effort?" and blah blah. And he was like, "You know, I think it's really good to have published a poetry collection and a novel, what he's published, and I could make a life on that." And he just writes. Like he teaches a bit, but it's not like he has a day job, and he's satisfied with that. So I do kind of tell myself, if it's just this book, I'll be grateful. I'll be a lot more grateful than if I didn't get published. So, you know, I'm good. But I have stuff I'm submitting. I'm really interested in more stories that, you know, were written a while ago, and then a few new ones. And friends of mine like the combination, and it's kind of a focus on interracial relationships, building from this piece that is in Best Small Fictions called 25 Hard Things About Being Married to a White Man, which I'm not, but it's fiction. It's really, but it's really condensed, and I was really startled by the reactions to that book, to that piece, you know. So it's a story collection kind of built around that piece, which again you can find for free on the
Can I stop telling you?
and then she's being a good literary assistant. There's also LitHub is really good, by the way. Talking about free stuff. LitHub, and then I write personal essays, so people are asking me to try to come up with something, but that'll take more time. I'll need Jen to edit that at some point. And then finally, hopefully a novel will like emerge at some point. But I mean, I think it's just really important to, again, like all these expectations other people have, like to not, you know, because the industry is shaped around, I want you, what do they want? I want you to submit a story collection and a novel at 26, 27, so that you'll be under 30 when it's published, when the first one is published. But then I want you to finish on time, like within 2 years after, so then the second one can be published. But you should already be starting the third. And basically it should be like every 2 to 3 years, or maybe 2 to 4 for literary, and then every year for commercial. Like John Grisham, who's wonderful on Interview, was saying, yeah, like this editor told me casually, well, the big guys come out with a new one every year, so I decided that was what I was going to do. You know. But like, I think it's really important to resist being made into a machine, because the value of what we do is anti-machine.
For me, I'm traveling a lot and doing a lot of workshops. But like creatively, I'm actually working on an essay about the murder of my uncle. He was murdered before I was born, so the angle of that, and there's no record of it. There's literally no record of him. There was nothing in the paper or anything that he was killed. And he was murdered, his name was John, and he was murdered late October 1980. John Lennon died like 5-6 weeks later. I was born a month later. And so it's kind of looking at that. So I'm doing research on like kind of the juxtaposition of two Johns being, both were shot within several weeks of each other, both were killed in New York City, and like the coverage that one gets, who is a white man. I mean, he's a Beatle, come on, I mean, but you know, it's a white man, and then my uncle who was a black veteran, and was not even given a little bit of space on the paper.
Wow.
So that's an essay that I'm working on. And I'm working on my fiction, like in the short story collection. I'm looking at them a bit at a time because it spans like 40, 50 years. But I go between fiction and nonfiction. And so, like for me, stories take years. So like like my long reads essay that published beginning of this year, I started drafting that 3 years ago. So for me, it takes time to, like I'm not a machine. But I know my process is like, oh man, in 4 years, this essay is going to be amazing. Like, so just give it some time to marinate on. But that one is like, it's a much tougher one because it's personal, but I never knew him, so I have to get military records and interview family and all this stuff. And so it's a very different level of like reporting and essaying than I've done before. So, what is it, 2019? 2023, y'all. 2023. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, guys. It's amazing. So, books are here. Jennifer from Village Bookstore is right over here, and she will be more than happy to sell books, and the authors will sign.
Yeah.
They'll sit in their comfortable chairs, and they'll sign. Yeah.
I'm happy not to sit in this room.
And then, what do you think about how much in advance do you usually go into the training?
Oh, it's right here.